Everyone, I thought that was me speaking. It's a translator. Sorry. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. Good evening. Thanks for joining. Welcome to Undod's event on solving the housing crisis in Wales. It's really good to see so many of you here. Just a bit about Undod. Undod is we call ourselves radical, but we're a socialist Republican group that is campaigning for Welsh independence. So we've been writing blogs on housing and homelessness and attending various demos and being involved in all sorts of activism for the last 2 years. We're looking at growing. We really want to grow our membership, so please go on our website and join up. I guess we were going to say this at the end, but the point of tonight, really, we wanted to sort of use it to catalyse a nationwide campaign on housing and homelessness. We really think that it's an incredibly central topic within Wales that we want to drag kicking and screaming into prominence within sort of Welsh politics, because it just doesn't generate enough outrage. It's an absolute national scandal what's going on with homelessness, with second homes, and we basically want to mount a campaign on it. So if you'd like to join in and help us, we've got a bunch of good ideas and we're always looking for volunteers. So as I said, please check out the Undod website and think about joining. Right, so tonight, as I said, I'm Dan, I'm chairing. We're delighted to be joined by some really fantastic speakers who bring a wealth of practical experience in housing to the table. So I'm joined by, where is she? Jenny Bibbins, who is head of campaigns at Shelter Cymru. Hello, Jenny. Where's Jenny? Ellen Howell. Ellen is the chair of Cymdeithas Community Group. Hello, Ellen. Rhys Tudur. Rhys is a town councillor in Nevin, an area which has been affected by second homes, and Rhys is going to tell us how he's been fighting against second homes. We're waiting on Douglas Haig from the Residential Landlords. He's not really joining us. If you go to IWA events, then he certainly would be, but we won't have any of that in Undod events. Okay, so some of the headline stats on housing and homelessness in Wales, just in case you're not aware of the scale of the problem. So last year in Wales, there were 12,399 households made homeless, which is, absolutely insane number. There are 24,671 empty houses. There are 24,423 second homes in Wales. Who's got the lawnmower on? Is that me? Okay. Anyway, I mean, the stats are absolutely appalling, and you only have buried, I would say, in the news this week was the horrific story that, despite it being the middle of a pandemic, and despite the Welsh Government claiming to have solved street homelessness, people are actually back out on the streets now, midway through a COVID scandal with nowhere to go because there's no space, because the Welsh Government haven't invested in adequate emergency accommodation. I'm an outreach worker with the homeless in Cardiff, and there is no capacity at the moment. Cold weather provision has been pushed back till December, so people are out and there's nowhere to put them in. It's a national scandal. So I think we'll start with Jenny. Jenny, why don't you, ask you a massive question to start off, but why don't you just talk about the scale of the problem and the structural issues that are faced, regarding homelessness in Wales?
Sure. I mean, I think the language that you use in Dan around it being a national scandal is, it's exactly the right kind of language that we need to be using. We've become so used to seeing people homeless, we've just started to accept that it's something normal. I had an argument on Facebook near the beginning of this year, because Bridgend Council had ploughed some money into these pods. I don't know if you've seen them. They're called what are they called? Amazing Graces, they're called. But they're like a portaloo with a bed in them and a spray for alcohol spray. That's literally all that there are. And on Facebook, everybody was giving such praise to the council for putting these horrible, stinking little portaloo pods in the town centre and saying, we need more of these, that's what we need. And I think I was like the only person on that page saying, this is horrible, this is a waste of public money. And also, is this as ambitious as we are for people? Is that what you think people want, is to live in a portaloo? Like, why have we forgotten the basic fact of homelessness being a lack of a home and a lack of support to maintain that home? Your experiences, Dan, around what's happening at the moment, we're seeing the effects of that as well in our casework. So just for those of you who might not know too much about Shelter Cymru, we're a housing advice charity. So so we give independent housing advice and advocacy to people who are either homeless or they're threatened with homelessness. We've been an independent charity working in Wales for nearly 40 years. So we started in 1981. So we see everything that goes wrong in the housing system in Wales, basically. And at the moment in homelessness, it's a really weird pattern, because there's some local authorities, and I'm quite happy to name Swansea as one of them. We're hardly getting any casework at the moment, because they've put a good system in place, and they are actually still accommodating everybody, and they're not evicting people. Whereas we've got other local authorities where we are seeing a hell of a lot of casework, and as we were able to talk about in the news this last week, we're seeing people evicted from temporary accommodation for some really trivial reasons, such as being 40 minutes home from 40 minutes late home from work. There were a couple who were a care leaver who were evicted because of £100 worth of service charge arrears, and they became street homeless. And so this stuff is happening, but we have to kind of take a step back from that. Even though these individual instances make you angry, you have to look at the system as a whole and understand the pressures that are causing these kinds of decisions being made. It's about the fact that, as Dan says, we haven't invested enough in the housing system. And yes, Welsh Government has made a load of money available now during COVID, but it's going to take a lot more than one single lump sum to solve years and years of underinvestment in housing. Wales, the Welsh Government has done various good things around housing, definitely, in recent years, and we have seen some improvements around security of tenure and things like that. I'm definitely not saying that they haven't done anything. But we can't avoid the fact that housing is a very, very, very small proportion of the Welsh Government budget. It's like 2.4%, and that's less than Scotland, and it's less than Northern Ireland. The only country that is even lower is England. So we need to do something to make sure that the money and the public investment flows from those fine words. And yeah, so I think at the moment the pressure in the system is because of a lack of affordable homes, and the stats that came out last week showed that about 900 people have been accommodated over the month. Only about half of them had gone on to permanent homes. So that's where we need to focus our efforts, is providing permanent affordable homes for people. And in terms of ending homelessness, the evidence is all there. We've got a really good blueprint for ending homelessness. There's the Housing First model. It's been done. We can see how well it works. So we know what to do. We've just got to do it. So I really welcome being a part of this tonight, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Diolch, Jenny. Thanks very much. We're going to circle around a lot of these points as we go on. What Jenny says there about at the core of this, I mean, there's a number of things which are particularly bleak. One is how rapidly as a society we get acculturated and basically just get used to seeing people sleeping in doorways. At first it's horrific, but then within a few weeks people start stepping over people. But I think we need to remember at the core of this is human misery. And it's obviously a bleak thing to do, but you've got tons of amazing people who aren't being able to fulfill their potential. People stuck in substandard rental accommodation, with no heating throughout Wales, and it really does, it ruins people's lives. It fundamentally ruins people's lives, and it's something that we've got a moral duty to address. So yeah, thanks, Jenny. We'll come back to all the points you raised. I just want to go to where's Rhys at the moment. Rhys, you are a town councillor in Nevin. So we're going to move on to the issue of second homes and issues in rural Wales. Can you just explain to us what's going on where you are?
Wel, ar y funud yn gwlad, wel, yn Ngwynedd, beth bynnag sydd mae yna sefyllfa ddychrynllyd efo nifer ail gartrefi sgynna ni yn y sir. Yn ôl stadegau blwyddyn dwytha o'r tai oedd ar y farchnad, mi oedd 40% o'r tai ar y farchnad yn mynd yn ail gartrefi. Mae hwnna'n ffigwr dychrynllyd yn ei hun. Yn sgil toriad y coronavirus yn ddiweddar, mae'r gyfradd yna wedi cynyddu yn sylweddol swn i'n tybio. A beth sydd yn ymhryderu fi ydy na does na ddim corff, ddim watchdog o fath yna i gadw llygad ar y sefyllfa o ddydd i ddydd a gweld faint o dai sy'n cael ei prynu yn y cymunedau ni fel ailgartrefi. Dylsa bod y wybodaeth yna yn law y llywodraeth a'r awdurdodau lleol. Wrth i rywun brynu tŷ, maen nhw yn gwneud cais ar gyfer treth tir. Rhai cartrefi, da chi'n gorfod talu treth tir o gwbl. Ond efo ail gartra, mae rhywun yn gorfod talu treth tir. A maen nhw hefyd yn gorfod nodi wrth brynu bod nhw'n prynu fel ail gartra. Wedyn, beth sydd yn siomi fi ydy'r diffyg gwybodaeth yn diweddaru ni o y stoc dai a faint sy'n mynd allan o afal pobl leol. Mae hynny'n mhryderu fi'n fawr. Ar ben hynny, yn ôl stadegau gen aelod o'r Gabinet Gyngor Gwynedd, mi oedd 60% o boblogaeth Gwynedd flwyddyn dwytha methu cael tŷ yn y sir. Wedyn oedd Jenny sôn gynt o broblem mawr sgynnon ni o ran fforddiadwyedd tai. Da ni'n gweld hynny hefyd. Da ni'n gweld yr effaith ailgartrefi'n gael ar prisio tai. Yr wsos dwytha'n y newyddion o gynnach chi stori am dŷ cyngor yn Abersoch. Ac oedd o'n mynd ar y farchnad am 380 o filoedd sydd yn swm syfrdanol. Dydy tŷ cyngor fel ddim fod i gael ei farchnata am bris o'r fath. Mae tŷ yna wedi cael ei wneud i rywun allu fforddio ac i rywun lleol allu byw yno fo. A mae'n siomi ni'n fawr gymaint mae'r farchnad di mynd allan y reolaeth. Rwsyd, dwi'n dadla fod y farchnad rydd yn farchnad gaeth bellach i bobl leol. Da ni jyst yn methu fforddio cael tŷ yn y sir. Mae yna batrwm yn ardal ni'n Cyngor Trefnefyn bod y gymuned yn mynd yn debyg i Abersoch. Oedd eto 30% o'r stoc dai yn ailgartrefi'n barod, a mae'n mynd yn gynyddol waeth. Da ni'n gweld arwyddion ar werth. Arwyddion yn mynd i fyny sydd yn ysbysebu bod ti ar werth, efo'r geiriau sôl dan efo yn barod fel mae'n cael ei godi. Ar ben hynny wedyn, mae rhywun yn cymharu ystadegau, ddoth i'n sylw fi'n ddiweddar, rhwng nifer ailgartrefi sy'n na yng Ngwynedd o'i gymharu fo siroedd eraill Gymru. Mae'r Gwynedd efo'r ucha drwy Gymru i gyd. Ar ben hynny, mae'n synnu rwysid mewn rhai siroedd fel Blaenau Gwent, yn ôl ystadegau treth cyngor, does a ddim ail gartra yno. Ella bod yr ystadegau yna ddim yn ystyried bob tŷ sy'n ail gartra, ond yn ôl yr ystadegau hynny, does am ail gartra ym Blaenau Gwent. Ac yn Nefyn, mae yna dros 300. Mae hynny yn fwy na sy'n yn Sir Fynwy, Casnewydd a Rhondda fo'i gilydd o ran ailgartrefi. A mae hynna'n dechrau rhywun faint o eithafol ydy'r broblam mewn amball fan yng Nghymru. Y cwestiwn sy'n codi oherwydd hynny wedyn ydy hi'n broblam genedlaethol, a dwi'n sicr yn dweud i fod o, oherwydd be da ni'n weld yn y funud ydy bod yr ailgartrefi mewn cymunedau lle mae'r iaith Gymraeg yn cael ei siarad gan y mwyafrif. Ac mae'r iaith yn rhywbeth sy'n unigryw i Gymru, mae ran yn hunaniaeth ni. Ar wrth swn i'n dada fod, wrth gwrs mae'n hunaniaeth ni dan mygythiad oherwydd y prynu a gartrefi. Rhywbeth eilla sy'n clymu fewn i be mae Jenny di ddeud, a rhywbeth eisiau ar ei draws yn ddiweddar ydy gymaint o dau gwigion sydd mewn siroedd yng Nghymru. Yng Ngwynedd hyd yn oed sydd efo problem mawr o ran diffyg trais ar gael i bobl leol, mae yna dros 1000 o ailgartrefi. A mae hynna'n ffigwr dychrynllyd. A hynny'n dim ailgartrefi, mae gen i o dau gwigion. Mae yna dros 1000 o dau gwigion. A hynny'n dau gwigion hirdymor. Wedyn, mae rhaid i ni gael incentives gwell i berchnogi tai sydd yn wag neu sydd angen i wella mwyn yn pobl leol ni sy'n methu fforddio cael cartra. Mae eisiau annog cymdeithasau tai i fuddsoddi yn y stoc dai bresennol. Oes mae eisiau codi tai o'r newydd i bobl leol, ond yn ogystal â hynna, mae eisiau gwneud defnydd o stoc dai sgynnon ni'n barod, a mae yna sawl un, fel da ni'n gweld, yn mynd yn segur. Mae yna ormod o dau gwigion, a mae rai ni fynd ar ôl hynny. Da ni'n gwybod yma broblem fawr sgynnon ni fod digartrefedd, ond o hynny o beth, mae'n warthus bod yna gyn gymaint felly o dau gwigion ym mhob sir yng Nghymru. Dwi'n dallt bod Sir Gaerfyrddin, dwi'n credu fod dros 2000 o dau gwigion, a mae hynna'n wallgo i fel gymaint o bobl sgynnon ni wedyn yn ddigartra. Bod yna ddim cynllun clir ag egwyddorol i fod yn rhoi pobl, bod yn ailfyddiannu'r tai yma, gwneud nhw fyny safon dda i bobl allu byw yn nhw de.
Diolch, Rhys, and thank you for explaining the scale of it. I was just looking on Stats Wales earlier as we start to move towards our campaign, and the statistics on second homes in Gwynedd are actually eye-watering. So according to Stats Wales, there are 4,900 second homes in Gwynedd. So that's 4,900 homes which are going to be empty the majority of the year. I'm just going to move to Ellen now. Based, Rhys has obviously touched on one of the key effects of the housing crisis in rural and North Wales is its deleterious effects on the Welsh language. Ellen obviously represents Cymdeithas, the community group. Ellen, why don't you tell us about what, if you can just start to build on what Rhys has said about the effect that the housing market is having on communities and the Welsh language in rural parts of Wales.
Okay, yeah, sure. So fel Cymdeithas Iaith, da ni yn ymwneud yn amlwg â'n cymunedau Cymraeg ni, ond mae Cymraeg yn iaith i bob cymuned, felly da ni'n ymwneud â'r cymunedau ar draws Cymru gyfan. A da ni'n edrych ar y sefyllfa tai, nid yn unig fel ail gartrefi, ond hefyd sut mae'r ffaith nad ydy bobl o'n cymunedau ni'n gallu prynu cartrefi yn y cymunedau maen nhw'n dewis byw yno, sut mae hynna'n effeithio arnyn nhw. A fath oedd Rhys yn dweud, ydych chi'n gwybod mae Abersoch yn enghraifft berffaith oherwydd mae yna ar y funud mae'n debygol fod ysgol Abersoch yn mynd i gau. Ysgol gynradd Abersoch yn mynd i gau, a hynny oherwydd fod na ddim digon o bobl yn byw yna ar hyd y flwyddyn. So mae'n enghraifft fyw anhygoel o sefyllfa ailgartrefi, o sefyllfa prisio tai yn codi mewn ffordd mor eithafol yn effeithio ar ein cymunedau ni. Felly, dyma lle mae Cymdeithas Iaith yn dod i mewn iddo, ydych chi'n gwybod. Da ni wedi bod yn gweithio ers amser rwan, a da ni wedi gweithio gyda cymunedau efo ieithoedd frifol o ar draws Prydain i ffurfio siarter tai, am be mae'r siarter yma'n gofyn amdan ydy hawliau i ni allu byw a bod yn ein cymunedau, a sut mae hyn yn gweithio i warchod yn iaith, gwarchod yn hunaniaeth. Oherwydd yn aml mae'n hunaniaeth ni'n amlygu yn ein cartrefi ni, ac mae'n bwysig bod ni hefyd yn sylweddoli'r gwahaniaeth rhwng tai a cartrefi, ynde. So pan da ni'n meddwl amdan dŷ, mae'n debyg bod ni'n meddwl amdan ased ar y farchnad, ond beth da ni'n sôn amdan yn fyma ydy tai a hawl i bawb i dau yn eu cymunedau nhw, a sut ddyle hynna gael ei roi yn bell o flaen gallu bobl i brynu ail dŷ neu ail gartref, lle mae'r rhai dim hyd yn oed hefo cartref cyntaf. A fel y Rhys yn dweud eto, mae'n effeithio ar yn cymunedau Cymraeg ni'n benodol. Mae bobl eisiau prynu ail-gartrefi yn cymunedau Cymraeg ni oherwydd bod nhw'n cymunedau sydd mor ddeiniadol i wyliau a ballu, ond hefyd mae'n gwneud ni hyd yn oed yn fwy bregus wedyn yn dydy. Oherwydd mae prisio yn gallu mynd yn bell uwch ben penna pobl leol. Rydyn ni ar y funud fel Cymdeithas Iaith yn edrych ar beth ydy siarter tai i Gymru yn benodol, felly ddatblygu ar y gwaith da ni wedi wneud efo ardaloedd eraill yn Prydain, ac ymateb i'r broblem yng Nghymru yn benodol, oherwydd mae'n broblem sy'n mynd ar draws o gefn gwlad reis drwad i ganol ddinas, ac mae eisiau wneud y cysylltiadau yna, mae eisiau gweld bod hyn yn broblem sydd yn mynd ar draws bob cymuned yn ein gwlad ni, a bod yr hawl gan ein pobl ni i allu byw a bod lle dylsan nhw fod yn eu cymunedau nhw a'i dewis nhw, bod hynna mor bwysig i warchod yn iaith ni a'n gallu ni i fod yn Gymraeg yn ein bywyd bob dydd.
Diolch, Elin. Thank you for putting that so eloquently. One of the reasons, Indod of course means unity, and I should just say that one of the reasons we came into being was to hopefully bridge the connections between the various struggles and problems that are going on in the different corners of Wales, and try to emphasise the commonalities that people have rather than the things we have that are different. And traditionally, if we're going to be honest, the elephant in the room in Wales is that the issue of second home ownership and the problems facing rural Wales have basically been ignored or othered or deemed as somehow, like a cultural issue or a language issue, or like an issue that only nationalists and Welsh speakers care about and things like this. So one of the reasons we came into being and was to try to show people that actually the things that affect working class people in Nevin, in Abersoch, in rural Wales are the same things that affect people in Cardiff, in urban Wales, in South Wales, in Mid Wales, even if they sometimes manifest themselves slightly differently. The root cause is the same, and in this case, housing, I think, is one of the best examples of this. The root cause is working class people being excluded from the housing market. That is the problem. Not having access to a home. The effects are the same. So I think what Ellen said there about the idea of home is a very powerful and potent one, because it is about home. It is about home. Not having security of home. If you're sleeping on the street, you haven't got a home, and if you have to move out of the community, that is also a horrible thing to have to experience. And obviously, just like people in Nevin and other communities are being priced out and can't buy homes in their community. This is the same for people in Cardiff and inner city Cardiff, and in all our cities and towns. Basically, people have to move because it's now impossible, essentially, to get a home and to achieve, I'd say, the basic things that people took for granted years ago. To have a home, to have a family, to have a secure job. These things have been completely ripped away from people. Anyway, I'm going to go back to Jenny now, because although it's not as visible, there is a lot of homelessness in rural areas. I think there were about 300 households made homeless in Gwynedd, for example, last year. Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about how homelessness manifests itself, in rural parts of Wales?
Yeah, certainly. And before I do that, just on the theme of looking for looking for threads of commonality in all of this, which I think is really important. And I really agree with that, because that's what we're doing at the moment in Shelter Cymru when we're looking at what we need to be doing around the housing affordability crisis. And you know, affordability is the thread that underpins this. It's about how expensive we've allowed housing to get, to the extent that it threatens communities, it threatens equality, it threatens the language, and particularly for the younger generation means that that they can't lead the life that they want to live, because you know there's loads of evidence showing how younger people these days, because of depressed wages and because of housing costs, are poorer than the generation of young people that went before them. So finding those common threads, I think, is really, really important. In terms of rural homelessness, there are differences, of course, and as we see it in our casework, part of the issue is because of how hidden people end up, because of being in rural areas where there aren't the services, there aren't the direct access hostels, and there aren't people visibly on the streets like there are in urban parts of Wales. So when we work with people who are homeless in rural areas, very often they're hidden. They're sleeping in their car, they're sleeping up the mountain in a tent, they're sleeping in a caravan, and as a result, they don't show up in the official statistics. They're not always in touch with the services that they need to be, and so there's particular challenges around all of that. The other side, of course, as well with rural homelessness, is that in many parts of Wales, the more rural parts of Wales, the local housing allowance is so low. I was talking the other week with our caseworker who covers Powys, and she was telling me how if you're a single young person and you're in Brecon and Radnorshire, the local housing allowance is £48 a week. How are you going to find somewhere to live for £48 a week? There just isn't anywhere. And it's the same in Carmarthenshire, it's like £50 a week. And that's with the uplift that we've had recently during COVID. That's at the 30th centile. There's just nowhere for young people in particular to go. So that's a massive issue around rural homelessness as well in particular.
Thanks, Jenny. Yeah, it's something that is, it's just not really talked about, I guess. You know, rural homelessness. It's not something that is has entered, you know, the political discourse, but it's hopefully something. Oh, sorry, Alan, do you want to come in there?
I think one of the issues as well with rural homelessness is it's a lot to do with young people. So a lot of the rural homeless are young and very young. And whilst there are really good charities that do work with young people who are vulnerable and homeless in Gwynedd, for example, we've got Gydag. For example, one of the things is that if they get older, or if they continue to be in that situation and become older, they tend to move from the rural. They move to the cities or the larger towns, but remain, you know, homeless or very, very vulnerable. So I think in a rural situation as well, we've got loads of sofa surfers, but they also suffer the double whammy of being young, so being othered as well, because they're young, not just because they're homeless, and it's a massive, massive problem. And it affects from a language point of view, it affects us obviously because they're our future, and if they can't see a future for themselves in the communities where they can use the language, then it's a massive issue, you know.
I wanted to bridge a topic which I think I thought might be a bit thorny tonight. So, you know, myself, you know, what we've been calling for Indod, and I know Shelter have been calling for it, because the Welsh Government have essentially relied on, you know, the market to solve the housing crisis, in a way that you would not rely on the market to solve health. You know, just like you wouldn't privatise the NHS, it would be seen as obscene. It's ridiculous that's how we try to solve housing and homelessness. But the solution that we've always argued is, you know, build more council houses, build more council houses, you know, build more council houses. Only 12 council houses have been built by the Welsh Government this year. But I know that in the past there have been issues, because I was going to ask Rhys, you know, in rural Wales, that's not, and, you know, the north, that's not always seen as the solution. Also, I've been told, you know, because I think the issue is often that the housing stock seems to actually be there, and the issues are about control of the list or information. Do you think there's any tension between like the overall demand to like build council houses and what's going on in places like Nefyn?
Wel, i atab hwnna ddeu gwir, dwi'm yn gweld llawer o bwyslais gyn yr sir ar wario ar dau cyngor i ddechrau fo. 'Swn i'n licio gweld lot mwy o ddefnydd o hynny. Oedd y ffigwr di o ran faint o dau cyngor sy'n cael eu codi yng Nghymru yn ddychrynllyd eisel, a mae hwnna di dychryn ni fy hun de. Ac dwi'n siŵr fysa codi tri cyngor yn fodd o sicrhau stoc dau barhaol i bobl leol de. A mae isio ffocysu ar hynny'n bendant. Be dwi'n weld yng Ngwynedd ydy lot o ffocws ar codi tair newydd, codi tair fforddiadwy wrth gwrs, a mae isio gwneud hynny, ond yn aml iawn mewn cymunedau lle mae tu fforddiadwy'n cael ei codi, hyd yn oed hynny ddim yn wirioneddol fforddiadwy de. Dwi'n meddwl 30% yn is ydi o'na pris y farchnad, ond fysa pris tŷ ar y farchnad yn Abersoch neu Nefyn dal yn golygu fod tŷ fforddiadwy'n gallu bod yn agos i 180 i 200,000 de. A mae hynny'n sioc. Beth arall dwi ddim yn keen ar dau fforddiadwy fel y cyfryw ydy bod na gyfyngiad o faint llawr y tŷ de. Dyla bod hynny ddim yn bod ei gwir lly. O be dwi'n all ydy bod y Llywodraeth yn rhoi rhyw ganllaw o faint ddyla'r floor space bod ar gyfer tŷ fforddiadwy. A dwi'n dall bod y cynghora sir yn dilyn hynny mwy neu lai yn lle mynd i ddisgresiwn eu hunan ac yn gwneud siŵr bod na ddim jyst tau efo floor space cyfyngedig i bobl leol, ond bod na dau sy'n fwy na'r cyfyngiadau sy'n cael ei roedd de. Ond beth swn i'n licio weld yn sicr hefyd ydy lot o fuddsoddi yn y stoc dau bresennol de. Achos be mae tŷ newydd yn gallu golygu weithiau ydy bod rhywun o'r gymuned ella'n symud i'r tŷ newydd ac wedyn mae'r tŷ, maen nhw wedi symud oddi wrtho fo, ella'n mynd yn ail gartra wedyn de. A mae hynny wedyn yn codi problem yn o'i hun. A swn i'n licio gweld lot wefusoddi yn y stoc dau a mwy o incentive gyn gymdeithasau tai o ran hynny. Maen nhw gyd yn weld yn ffocysu ar godi tai o'r newydd a mae eisiau gwneud hynny, ond dim dyna ddyla'r dyla ni ffocysu ar beth sgynnon ni'n barod, y stoc dau bresennol.
Diolch, Rhys. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone has read the INDOD Guide to Solving the Housing Crisis, but we did a lot of work on what Rhys says, this idea of, the Welsh Government always say, we're building affordable housing, we're building affordable housing. Now, as Leanne Wood pointed out during one of the Senedd Plenary Committee, the Welsh Government's definition of affordable stretches, the term to absolute breaking point. And I think in one of the committees, the Welsh Government admitted that anything that that has involved any form of government subsidy is classed as affordable. So the Welsh Government official Help to Buy scheme, which is included in their definition of affordable housing, that includes houses of up to £300,000. The average Help to Buy affordable house in 2018-2019 was over £200,000. We're looking at it now, some of the statistics. When they did the Help to Buy scheme, for new buyers, people trying to get on the housing ladder, they didn't even exclude people who already owned houses. So it wasn't even for, 24% of people using the scheme weren't even first-time buyers. Only 4.2% of people using the scheme earn less than £20,000. And people actually using this scheme turned out to be, they're buy-to-let landlords, using the Help to Buy scheme. The Welsh Government essentially just copied the Conservative Party's affordable house scheme, affordable house buying scheme that was widely slated by the Labour Party in England, but the Welsh Government just adopted it wholesale. And we can see throughout the COVID pandemic, where their priorities lie. That they've given absolutely, no breaks for tenants, but there's been breaks for, landlords have been able to apply for mortgage holidays. They've been able to, what else have they done, Jenny? That's right, they give a holiday for, the stamp duty holiday. So everything is geared towards, the market. There's nothing, this is meant to be a social democratic government, which is, adopting a wholesale conservative policy and strategy when it comes to solving the housing crisis. I could go on a massive rant and tangent there, the things they've done. So yeah, back to Jenny.
I know Ellen had a hand up before as well.
Oh, sorry,
I just jumped ahead. I was going to say, to be honest, what you just said then, Dan, I just presented another meeting earlier on today about the difference between affordable housing and social housing, because we've got a campaign running at the moment, which is build social housing. And so far we've had 900 people have sent emails to MSs in Wales asking them to make social housing a priority for the next Senedd term. And we've had some good responses back, but of course the Welsh Government come back and said, well, we're on target to build 20,000 affordable homes, and there's this basic, mismatch in the language that we're using. But if you look at the figures, the actual social homes are only about half that figure. And I know, Dan, you were saying that such a low number of council homes have been built in the last year. To be fair to Welsh councils, they are now, because of they've had some restrictions lifted on what they can borrow. So there are plans now for a new generation of council housing to come through in Wales. And in our view, that can't happen soon enough. But I definitely agree as well with what Rhys is saying, that we can't let that be our sole focus, because we've got some big problems with our current housing stock. Some of it is in some really bad condition, and especially damp and cold. It's a particular issue for us in Wales. So we need to be focusing on that as well. And if people are buying, if people are moving into new homes and then having their existing homes bought as second homes, well, we need to deal with that through some specific regulation. We shouldn't let that hold up our ambitions to build homes to the rate that we need in Wales.
I'm going to just jump in and briefly talk a little bit about this, this idea of social housing. Like, what is social housing? When we think of social and council housing, we think of the houses that were built after World War II by Aaron Bevan. What we would think of, you grow up in a council house, you grow up in a council estate. These are houses that are controlled by local authorities, where rents are set at a reasonable rate. And now in Wales, when we call social housing, these are overwhelmingly delivered by housing associations, which are obviously private organisations. Stefan Evans at the Bevan Foundation has done some incredible work on this. So housing associations are obviously, they are privately funded, so they fund these. The burden, they are responsible for the overwhelming majority of building what we know as social housing in Wales. It's not, they're no longer in the hands of local authorities by and large. It's being farmed out to housing associations, just like the rest of it has been farmed out to the private rented sector. So, but what is scandalous about that is that in order to build these new generation of social houses, social landlords or registered social landlords housing associations across Wales have been raising rents for social tenants to pay. So the burden of building these these social affordable housing is actually falling on the most vulnerable people in society. They are having rent rises that are higher than the rate of inflation, that they cannot afford to build these houses. And it is that's possibly another event in itself. But in what Indod have been arguing is that we absolutely need to move social housing back into the hands of local authorities. It cannot be farmed out to private to housing associations, because although housing associations have got a very a fluffy image and so on and so forth, ultimately they're private companies. They have shareholders. They are, even if they are not, they are run along the lines of private businesses. If you want to argue that point after, we all can. But we strongly believe that council houses should be council houses run by local authorities. Ellen, back to you.
Yeah, I totally agree that the issue mae'r ffordd mae housing associations wedi cael eu corptreiddio, mae o'n broblem mae rhaid i ni sbio ar, a mae'n digwydd yma yng Ngwynedd hefyd. Ond i fynd yn ôl i tai fforddiadwy, un o'r pethau ni eisiau nodi yma oedd y risg ydy efo tai fforddiadwy ydy beth sy'n gyrru y nifer o dai. So os da ni'n cael cymuned yn gofyn ac yn dweud da ni angen tai yn y gymuned yma i bobl o gymuned, felly mae angen tai fforddiadwy. Dydwch bod nhw yn gofyn am hyn a hyn o dai fforddiadwy. Wel, yna mae'r ganran o dai sydd ddim yn fforddiadwy wedyn yn gorfod cael ei adeiladu ar ei ben hynna. A wedyn ydy'r is-adeiledd yn y gymuned yna i alluogi hynna i ddigwydd. A mae mor bwysig oherwydd mae'r straen un cymunedau ni yn fwy diom jyst yn mater o adeiladu 10 tŷ fforddiadwy, ond efo'r 10 tŷ fforddiadwy yna sydd yn lot, i ddweud y gwir, fel arfer yna un tŷ fforddiadwy a 5 tŷ arall. Mae'r nifer o dai sydd ddim yn fforddiadwy a sy'n gallu mynd fel gartrefi neu sydd yn hollol tu allan i allu bobl leol i brynu yn llawer iawn uwch. Felly mae eisiau sbio ar is-adeiledd yn cymunedau ni, ydy'r ysgolion yn gallu gymryd o, ydy llefydd doctor yn gallu cymryd o neu beth bynnag. Ond y broblem ydy wedyn ydy mae gennym ni gymunedau Cymraeg neu lle bynnag yng Nghymru sydd yn gweiddi allan am dai, ond wedyn yn gorfod cwffio'n erbyn adeiladu tai sydd â chanran o rei yn ailgartrefi. So mae'r gwrthgyferbyniad yna'n hyrt, really. Dwi'n cytuno, mae eisiau ailberchnogi tai yn ofnadwy. Mae'r argyfwng efo tai rhent o ansawdd drwg yn un sydd yn effeithio ni just gymaint yn y cymunedau yma. Yn wedi lle mae gennym ni gymunedau sydd yn cael ei nodi fel ddifreintiedig sydd fel arfer yn rhai iaith Gymraeg gyntaf, enghraifft Tan y Grisiau yng Ngwynedd, lle maen nhw yn cael y tlodi tanwydd mwyaf yn Ngwynedd yn Nghymru os nad ym Mhrydain. A maen nhw'n byw drws nesaf i hydro enfawr sy'n gwneud digon o wastraff egni i roi pŵer yn y tai yna i gyd. Dach chi'n gwybod? Mae eisiau sbio ar y broblem yma yn ei gyfanrwydd yn sut mae'n effeithio'n cymunedau ni yn ei gyfanrwydd. Ac mewn gwirionedd, dim galluogi pobl i fynd ar y farchnad a prynu tai a beth bynnag ydi, ond beth da ni angen wneud ydy ailberchnogi nid yn unig yr adeiladau, ond y syniad ma o gartrefi, na ni fel cymunedau sy'n bia yr syniad ma o gartrefi, ac felly beth da ni eisiau ydy rhoi cartrefi i bobl yn ein cymunedau ni, a ddim gorfodi nhw fod ar y farchnad o gwbl, just rhoi tŷ cartra clud, hir dymor, maen nhw'n gallu adeiladu i teuluoedd yno fo, maen nhw'n gallu cael gwaith yn lleol, mae hyn i gyd wedi clymu fo'i gilydd, da chi'n gwybod? Ond ar ben hynny hefyd, o'n i jyst eisiau nodi efo'r syniad ma o hefyd adeiladu tai cymdeithasol neu tai cyngor newydd. Mae eisiau edrych ar hynna mewn i gyfanrwydd hefyd, a edrych ar sut mae cynghorau ni, sut mae y Llywodraeth yn gallu felly cyflogi bobl lleol, busnesau lleol, busnesau Cymraeg yn y cymunedau ni i adeiladu'r tai yma, a bod ni'n sicrhau bod hynny'n digwydd. Mae hynna'n rhan o'r pictiwr hefyd, oherwydd os ydy'r cynghorau mynd ati i adeiladu tai yn y cymunedau ni, gret, ond os ydyn nhw'n cael bobl o Loegr i ddod yma i adeiladu nhw, mae hynna'n sgandal mewn gwirionedd, achos nid yn unig ydy'n cymunedau ni'n cael ei roi mewn sefyllfa lle maen nhw'n gorfod cael tai cyngor yn hytrach na gallu mynd ar y farchnad i brynu i'w tŷ hunan. Ond hefyd, dyn nhw'n gallu cryfhau'r economi, oherwydd mae'r cyngor ei hun yn gorfod mynd allan i Gymru i brynu gwaith i ddod i adeiladu nhw. Felly mae rhaid i ni fel bobl sy'n ymwybodol o'r sefyllfa yma, mae rhaid i ni fod yn ymwybodol o bob agwedd ohono fo, fel bod ni'n gallu gwneud yn siŵr bod yn cynghorau ni, gwneud yn siŵr bod yn Llywodraeth ni, yn meddwl amdano fo fel un pictiwr yn hytrach na chydig o silos yma ag acwll gyda.
Diolch, Elin. I'm aware that there's, that we've had a fantastic turnout here, 53 people. I was wondering whether the speakers, you'd be okay with us starting to take questions from people, and then at the end we will of course discuss the question, what is to be done. we'll discuss that afterwards. And hopefully that'll be our next meeting. But if you've got questions for Ellen, Jenny and Reese now, if you start putting a dot in the chat, I'll start unmuting you, or you can unmute yourself, and then we can continue a discussion in a more not democratic, we'll allow everyone to start to contribute. First up, we have the peerless Robert Idris, who's going to he's revealed himself. Robert, have you got a question for people?
Yes, and you're wearing a very nice cap tonight, Dan, and thank you for this excellent meeting. I'd just like to introduce Karen Steve Wilson from Pembrokeshire, who I've been working with recently. They're very concerned about the situation in Pembrokeshire, their area, and also we've been working with Catrin O'Neill, who's in Aberdyfi, which is not dissimilar to Abersoch in many respects, I suppose. So they're keen to produce a charter, as are we all, I guess, to maybe several organisations can sign up to, because obviously there's a kind of momentum building up between various organisations, Cymdeithas, Undod, and so on. So would you be good enough to give the floor to Steve and Cara briefly, if that's okay, Dan, please?
Yes, of course, Rob.
How do I?
Oh, you you launched us into that, Rob. Well, we've trying to do 3 different things actually. We're on a sort of national level. We've also been starting to look at a charter cartrefi, but we're not from an organisation, so we were trying to bring together a charter which was representing what everybody's point of view. And Rob and Steve are working on that.
Catrin.
And Catrin. We've also, I'll let Rob talk about that in a second. I'm going to pass it back to you, Rob. We've also written a letter to our county council in Pembrokeshire asking them to declare a housing emergency, which is going to be debated as a notice of motion, I think they're called, on the 10th of December.
Well, it's been submitted, isn't it?
It's been submitted to debate. So we are hoping that, well, we're expecting that to go ahead in December. And we've got the support of a couple of councillors to take that forward. So we're sort of inviting anyone, whatever county you are in Wales, we would really like this to be copied and, do something similar in your county and lobby your community councils and your county councils to declare a housing emergency, rather like the climate emergency was rolled out across the UK and around the world. The third thing we're doing, so we can give contacts, we can give information. I'll put my email in the chat afterwards, which you can contact me about those things. The other third thing we're doing, which is slightly different, which might be relevant to Nevin a little bit. We're in a coastal village which has a lot of lovely old houses. They're being bought up very quickly. We don't think we need to build more houses here, but we're concerned that the locals are being pushed out. So we're looking at setting up a housing trust, arranging peer-to-peer loans and buying our own village properties and then renting it back and looking at shared equity, particularly for local people. So that's a third.
There's a structure behind that to support it, yeah.
The community land trust is the sort of structure we're looking at behind that. So there's 3 ideas that we're doing.
No, thank you, Cara. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Robert. Sounds absolutely fantastic. It'll be fun. It'll be brilliant to pull all these together when we have a meeting of the great minds gathered here at some stage to, as we move forward into launching a campaign. It is just worth noting before I forget about, you talk about the housing emergency there. Now, Delith Jewell and a bunch of other people have been pushing for housing to be formally made a human right in Wales. Now, this, as what normally happens in Welsh government, poverty committees have recommended, the anti-home, I think it's the anti-homeless action group or whatever it is that they all sit on. The numerous committees have recommended very strongly that housing be declared a human right in Wales. Now the Welsh government, accepted this in principle, and Julie James was fairly candid about this in the Senate. She said, well, we can't do that because it would mean that local authorities would break the law every day because we don't have the supply we just don't have the supply to ensure that everyone in Wales has a council house. So she was quite open about the fact that they can't fulfil housing. 20 years since devolution, we're in the situation where people don't have guaranteed shelter, and the Welsh government won't implement it as a right because they know they can't make it, and even though they accept that they can't fulfill it, there's, as Jenny said, there's seemingly no urgency in trying to solve it. Ellen, do you want to come in there before I go to Sal?
Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, I totally agree with everything you've said, ond un o'r pethau sy'n mor bwysig yn yma ydi bod ni yn meddwl amdan iaith, fatha bod ni yn defnyddio'r gair cartra yn lle tŷ, bod ni yn defnyddio'r gair cartra yn lle shelter, oherwydd maen nhw'n meddwl pethau mor anhygoel o wahanol. Os da ni'n edrych ar enghreifftiau fatha'r Ffindir enghraifft, lle maen nhw'n dweud cartra hir dymor i bobl sydd ar y funud yn ddigartra, a'r gwahaniaeth mae hynna di wneud yn y tymor hir o nyn nhw'n syrthio nôl i mewn i ddigartrefedd, nyn nhw'n syrthio yn ôl i mewn i fod yn bobl bregus. Mae wedi gwneud gwahaniaeth anhygoel, jyst y syniad ma o allu deud fama dwi'n byw a fama fyddai'n byw, mae'n hynod o bwysig, dwi'n meddwl.
Yeah, I agree, Ellen. Thank you very much. We'll go to Sel from Cymru Bro. One and only. Hello, Sel.
O, diolch. Undod, dwi'n meddwl ddyla ni fatha meddwl am uno efo y bobl sydd mor anffodus a prynu tai. Cos ti'n prynu tŷ a ti'n talu morgais sy'n mynd â gymaint o dy incwm di am gyhyd. Oedd yn had yn saer coed. Cyflog cymarol fach, ond mae'r holl bres sy'n gysylltiedig efo tai i gyd yn mynd, nid i'r bobl sy'n codi tai, yr adeiladau'r ac yn y blaen, ond i'r holl system cyllidol. A da ni'n rili mynd i raidd y broblem. Tan da ni yn cydnabod y broblem ydy bod tai yn nwydd marchnad. A tan mae hynny'n stopio, da ni ddim yn mynd i ddatrys y broblem. Mae rhaid i tai fod nid yn nwydd marchnad, ond mae rhaid iddyn nhw fod yn adnoddau cymunedol. Mae yna bosib wedyn cael bob math o bethau. Bod ni, lle bod ni'n meddwl am berchenogi tai, bod ni'n meddwl am fod yn stiwardiaid yn gyfrifol am byd. Mae rhaid newid yr holl beth o fod yn berchnogaeth tai, a fod tai yn nwyddau. Fel arall, yn mynd rownd a rownd â ni. Diolch.
No, very well said, Sal. I absolutely agree. One of the main, if we do nothing else, we have to try to change the common sense about housing. And as you said, try to turn it into something that's a right, not a financial asset. I do think one of the reasons that people are obsessed with, getting on the ladder is basically, it's a chicken and egg scenario. The lack of security there is in housing, the more people are driven to try to buy a house, because obviously the alternative is the private rented sector, which is so brutal. Once we reform it and build more council houses and more affordable housing, that will have a virtuous effect, I hope, on the whole system, and remove the impetus to get on the housing ladder, sort of escape the dog-eat-dog world of the PRS. But yeah, 100%, that's got to be front and center. There's been a dot from Elspeth. Elspeth?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Dan. I've got a kind of short question for Jenny and then a question for Ellen, if that's okay. I wanted to ask Jenny.
I can't hear Elspeth.
Speak up a bit.
Oh, yeah, Elizabeth, this is not exactly a question, it's an offer.
Oh.
Is that all right? It's the more I've listened to Shelter, I wonder if there's an opportunity for volunteering. That's what I was wondering, because it's my professional work in the past. That's what I wanted to say, because I'm a bit devastated this week. My cousin has told me about 4 homes in the village of Larn, which have been bought up with a view to holiday homes, and obviously the people living there are devastated. And the more I listened to the presentation by Shelter, this was so much of what I did when I was working, and I just wondered if there was any work needed to be done voluntarily in Shelter, that I would be very happy to help.
Definitely. Please get in touch. I'll put my email in the thing, and please drop me an email and we'll talk.
Diolch, Mary. I'm just going to go back to Elspeth a second, guys, because she got cut off then. Apologies, Elspeth. The floor is yours. Bad sharing.
My short question to Jenny is how much this crisis in Southeast Wales is a result of the welfare reforms, you know, the bedroom tax and the universal credit and stuff, which has really made people's circumstance. There's no welfare safety net really anymore. So I wondered how much worse things had got since then. And my question for Ellen is kind of related to a point I put in the chat, which is around because young people can't buy locally, they often end up living away from grandparents. And I mean, I know from my own experience, sort of practically and academically, that grandparents are very important to children, particularly to families who are living in really parlous circumstances. They're incredibly important to children to plug gaps. But I also wondered, what's the impact of that on the Welsh language? Because obviously in a Welsh language community like that, it's important to have access to your Welsh speaking grandparents, as well as perhaps the one or both parents that you have. So I just wondered what her thoughts were on that, please.
Should we go Jenny then, Ellen?
Okay. Welfare reform, yes, we've seen it cause homelessness, and you know, since the reform started to come in, we were warning that the bedroom tax, for example, was going to cause a lot of people to lose their homes, and we marched and we did petitions and everything, and it happened anyway. And then we did start to see it happen. You know, that's one of the most frustrating things sometimes about our work, is when you see changes come in and we can't do anything about them in Wales, but we can see the effect of them. So the bedroom tax, the benefits cap, that really hit some families and children really hard. And the 5-week wait as well, which we just can't, you know, Shelter in England, our sister organisation, just cannot seem to persuade the government to shift on that, even though we can see people losing their homes because of it. And so this point about benefits is really important. We've talked a lot about building social housing, and building social housing is one of the ways in which a government needs to subsidise housing, because if we've allowed housing to become as expensive as we have, then the government has got to do something to make sure that people on modest incomes can still access this essential resource that has become so ridiculously expensive. And building social housing is part of that. But the welfare benefit system is part of that as well. We need to have a housing benefit that is fit for purpose. And yes, the bill is going to keep growing, because if the cost of housing keeps growing, the housing benefit bill is going to keep growing. But we can't have a government that is allowed, you know, that is allowing to let housing become so expensive, and yet is not honouring the other side of the equation, making sure that people on modest incomes can still access it.
Diolch, Jenny. Ellen, you field the question on grandparents.
I couldn't hear Elspeth very well. I can kind of recap on what Jenny was saying, but could you?
Elspeth was asking. I mean, obviously there is an issue of intergenerational language transmission in rural areas, and the role of grandparents. You know, to what extent does the housing crisis impact on?
Okay, so yeah, massively, and it's one of the reasons why Cymdeithas yr Iaith, pan bod Cymdeithas yr Iaith yn ymwneud efo'r mater yma, ydy galluogi'n cymunedau ni gario ymlaen i'r dyfodol, a galluogi i'r iaith fod yn rhan annatod o'r cymunedau hynny. So mae'r ffaith bod pobl ddim yn cael y strwythur o gefnogaeth o'i cwmpas nhw wrth iddyn nhw fynd ati i fyw i bywydau, i sefydlu teuluoedd ac i greu cartref. Mae'n hollol hanfodol, ydych chi'n gwybod, ac mae'r iaith wedyn yn mynd yn fwy bregus oherwydd bod y trosglwyddiad na o nain a taid i rieni i blant yn cael ei dorri mewn ffordd, a bod yr hyn sydd yn mynd ymlaen o gwmpas y plant o'r genhedlaeth newydd yn bellach ac yn bellach o i cnefu nhw ac o'i teuluoedd nhw. Felly mae'n holl bwysig i drosglwyddo'r iaith o un genhedlaeth i'r llall, fod y gallu i gymdeithas yn cario ymlaen. So mae'n rhan annatod ohono fo, lle. Di hynna'n ateb o cwestiwn, dwi'n yn siŵr, sori.
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much. I mean, it's what I suspected. Because I knew you'd have a lot of experience really in seeing this, but thank you.
Diolch, Evan. I've got a question from Nigel on Facebook that I missed. Apologies. I'm going to pitch this to Rhys. Maybe Rhys will be able to tell us. Are councils allowed to borrow money from banks? The reason I ask is it's not as if they haven't got people on their waiting list who could take up tenant agreements. Now, that's not something I'm aware of. I'm not a councillor. Rhys, do you know where, what your money sources are and where you can borrow from?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. Dydw i ddim yn gynghorydd sir, cynghorydd tre dwi. Dwi'n yn sicr lle, maen nhw'n beth yn cael pres. Dwi'n gweld beth mae'r werthig o ddiweddar bod yna gynllun gyn principality i ariannu cynghora sir. Dwi'n meddwl hwnna rhyw rannol atab y cwestiwn. Ond fel arall, dydym yn gwybod o le mae'r ffynhonnell arian sydd ar gyfer ariannu prosiectau nhw i godi arian. Ond rhywbeth dwi wedi bod yn mynd ar ei ôl yn ddiweddar ydy be di'r gwariant maen nhw wedi bod yn neud a trael y gwariant ar gyfer badd i benion. Mae'r cyngor wedi bod yn gwario cyllid fwyaf wrth ystyried tai ydy o ar gynlluniau tai fforddiadwy, ydy ar gyfer tai cymdeithasol. Mae'n rhywbeth dwi'n sicr eisiau mynd ar ei ôl, achos nes i ddod i ddallt fod Llywodraeth Cymru yn ariannu cynllun prynu cartra, a beth di hwnnw ydy bod nhw'n cynnig equity rhwng 30 i 50% i fedru helpu darpar brynwyr gydberchnogi tŷ. Mae hwnna'n sicr yn rhywbeth manteisiol i rywun mewn cymunedau fatha sgynnon ni Nefyn, lle mae prisio farchnad wedi codi i grocbris. Ond mi ofynnwys i'r cyngor sir faint o ddefnydd fu o'na o'r cynllun cymorth prynu yma, yr cydberchnogi. A iddyn nhw, 12 tŷ nath ddefnydd ohono fo drwy Wynedd blwyddyn dwytha. A mae hynny'n ffigwr isal iawn. Dwi'n siŵr fysa'r cynllun yn gallu cael ei ddefnyddio'n eang iawn, petai yn cael ei hyrwyddo'n ddigonol, a petai ffocws y cyngor Gwynedd ar ariannu'r cynllun yn ytrach na cynlluniau eraill. Ond be dwi ar ddall ydy fod arian mae'r Llywodraeth yn rhoi ar gyfer y cynllun equity yma yn mynd i bot pres tai cymdeithasol Gwynedd. A wedyn mae hwnnw sydd allan creu rhyw gyr pen lle ydych chi'n mynd i ariannu darpar brynwyr i brynu'r tŷ pa ma tŷ ar y farchnad am grocbris a fod equity o 30-50% o hynny hyd yn oed yn werth uchel iawn o arian. So ydych chi'n mynd i fod yn ffocysu ar gatai cymdeithasol de. A mae hynny'n andros o benderfyniad anodd. Ond mae'n syni rhywun bod yr cyngor sir yn gorfod mwyn a heb penderfynu'r naill neu llall. Ydyn nhw'n mynd i fod yn gymryd rhan mewn prosiectau cydberchnogi, neu ydyn nhw'n buddsoddi yn tai cymdeithasol. Mae'n syndod bod gyda nhw'r dilema egwyddorol yna, na ddylsa na ddim fod yn bodoli.
Diolch, Rhys. Ellen, you had your hand up there.
Dwi'n meddwl bod yna gyfyngiadau ar faint o fenthygiadau mae cyngor sir yn cael wneud, ond dwi'n meddwl bod rhaid i ni hefyd edrych ar pa ffyrdd eraill mae'r cyngor sir yn gallu effeithio ar hyn fatha hawliau cynllunio. Enghraifft, mae hyn yn effeithio trefi hefyd, ydy pa mae adeiladau'n cael eu prynu a'i troi mewn i fflatiau, faint o heina sydd yn addas i bobl leol a faint o hynny nhw sydd yn hollol anaddas, ella efo dim digon o loftydd neu beth bynnag. Be mae'r cyngor sir yn gallu gwneud i gyrru'r farchnad dau mewn ffyrdd gwahanol eto sydd maen nhw'n cefnogi cymunedau a pethau fel yma. So mae gennyn nhw ffyrdd eraill yn hytrach na just prynu fel yr hawliau cynllunio sydd angen cael ei adnabod fel rhywbeth beth nhw ddefnyddio hefyd, a mae'n rhaid i ni eto fod yn gofyn i'r cwestiwn iddyn nhw fatha mae Rhys yn neud, o be maen nhw'n neud, lle maen nhw'n gwario pres, beth yw'r penderfyniadau maen nhw yn gymryd. faint mor hawdd ydi i bobl wrthwynebu tai gwyliau neu pentrefi gwyliau fath o da ni wedi gweld yn rhaid hyn yn cael ei adeiladu sydd a beth sy'n digwydd wedyn ydy unwaith mae gennych chi cynifer o dau gwyliau yn cael ei adeiladu yn y gymuned. Mae'r gymuned yn tueddu i fynd yn un sydd mond yn gwasanaethu y tai gwyliau yma. Felly mae'r tai sydd yn fforddiadwy yn mynd i'r rheini sydd yn gweithio yn yr pentrefi gwyliau. Ac felly mae cael yn y gymuned yn mynd eto. Mae yna gymaint o agweddau hyn da ni angen edrych arno hefyd. Y peth arall o'n eisiau sôn amdano efo hynna, efo y cynlluniau sydd yn helpu bobl i brynu tai, ydy mae angen y cefnogaeth yna i helpu y bobl o'r cymunedau i geisio amdan y rhaglenni prynu tai yma. Dim jyst dweud, mae gennym ni gynllun yma lle gwch chi hyn a hyn y cant i prynu tŷ. Mae'n rhaid wedyn helpu'r bobl mwyaf bregus yn ein cymunedau ni i edrych ar sut maen nhw'n mynd o gwmpas i fod yn deilwng i drio amdan hwnna a sut maen nhw'n gwneud y gwaith papur a weithio mae'n gallu teimlo'n gymaint o fwrn neu bobl yn mynd hynod yn trio a swn i'n fel bod hynna'n lot i wneud efo pan bod yna gynlleiad yn mynd amdan y cynlluniau yma.
Diolch, Helen. Now, the cynic in me, I've got a bit of a problem with, some of the help, not all the shared equity schemes, but some of the focus on help to buy. Now, for me, a lot of that is a problem because it seems as if this ties the Welsh government into the idea that rising house prices are permanently a good idea, because obviously the more house prices rise, the more the Welsh government will actually view help to buy schemes as a moneymaker, and undoubtedly that is why so much of, I think it was over 200 million has been invested in help to buy schemes so far, because undoubtedly, the more these house prices rise, the more the Welsh government will get equity back from them. So, if you spoke to many people in the Welsh government and said actually rising house prices are a really bad thing, I'm sure most of them would look at you as if you had two heads. And I'm sure a lot of people in society would look at you extremely funny. It's become so hegemonic, the idea that, the idea of a house as an asset which you should profit off, the idea of rising house prices being an ambiguously bad thing, it is something that we, as Sel said, we absolutely need to challenge. So there's a question from Twitter: conversations on holiday homes gentrification go hand in hand as a commonly affect the middle and upper classes on the working class across Wales, but gentrification is rarely discussed. Wonder why we focus on one, not the other. So I would personally massively disagree with that, because Indod has been pushing gentrification and trying to draw attention to this for 2 years. Reclaim Cardiff is currently, Indod members are very active in, is currently drawing attention to gentrification in Cardiff. I think one of the ways, that question gets to the heart of, I'd say, the misunderstanding about what gentrification is. Like we spoke with this Owen Hamlers and I reading group. Gentrification is not just something that happens in the inner city. It's not just social cleansing in inner city communities. Gentrification is an expansive term which encompasses the entire working class. The whole process of working class people being shut out from the housing market, whether it happens in rural areas or urban areas. That's all gentrification. It's not one or the other. So I guess one of the points of this talk and bringing people together is precisely to draw attention to that, the fact that these things are not different. So I think that's a false dichotomy. Hugh Williams has a dot.
Hi Dan. Yeah.
Hello.
Because it's a bedtime story, so I just wanted to make a couple of points that perhaps broaden out the discussion or connected with other issues. Just what you're talking about there in terms of the work that we're doing or trying to do in Cardiff. It makes me think about the comments earlier about the importance of decentralising to local authorities. Of course, that's not the end of the job, is it, in many ways? Because what we need is a big effort to democratise politics at the local level. You can put the decision and the power in the hands of local authorities. That's no guarantee that the good things are going to happen. So I think there needs to be an awareness around that. The second thing, really, I gweud yn Gymraeg. So wy'n dod o ardal o Geredigion, lle rili, dych chi ddim wedi cael yr un problem o ran tai haf, ond beth chi wedi cael dros y blynydde, dros ddegawdau, yw pobl yn symud mewn i'r ardal, ond yr un i'r effaith rili, hynny yw bod pobl leol yn cael eu prisio mas o'r farchnad. Felly, eisiau gofyn cwestiwn os yna gormod o bwyslais jyst ar y syniad o dai haf, a falle bod eisiau edrych ar y broblem hyrithach o jyst prisio tai yn gyffredinol, a pobl leol yn cael eu prisio mas. Ac wrth gwrs, beth sy'n gyd-destun i hwnna, rhywle fel Ceredigion yn arbennig yw, mae eisiau sgwrs cofio beth yw natur yr economi lleol, lle yn aml iawn, does na ddim dyfodol, does na ddim swyddi, a felly pobl ifanc yn gorfod gadael, nid dim ond just oherwydd diffyg tai fforddiadwy, ond diffyg gyrfa, really. Okay.
Diolch, Hugh. Rhys, do you want to field that one and then we'll come to Sel Jones?
Ia, jyst cyfeirio'r pwynt oedd Hugh wedi wneud yn fanna, ynglyn â datganoli pwera, dwi'n credu yn gyfeirio ato fo. Mae'n rhywbeth dwi wedi bod yn drio bwysleisio'n ddiweddar. Mi gerddodd aelodau gyngor Trefn efo ymgyrchwyr Cymdeithas yr Iaith i Gaernarfon yn lle diweddar o Nefyn, mewn protest, a mi gerddo'n ni ddrws pencadlys y cyngor sir a'n galwad ni oedd bod angen datganoli pwerau'r sir i ddelio hefo argyfwng ail gartrefi. Be dwi wedi bod yn weld o ystadegau ydy fod cyfradd ail gartrefi yn fwy yn uchel iawn yng Ngwynedd, a mae'n ambar sir fath o Blaenau Gwent yn ôl ystadegau treth cyngor dos am un yna. Be swn i'n licio weld mwy na dim ydy cyfraddau treth tir wahanol ar gyfer siroedd Cymru, neu bod y cyngor a sir yn gallu pennu'r cyfraddau hynny, bod y pŵar di ddatganoli nhw benderfynu faint o dreth tir maen nhw'n godi ar ailgartra. Achos dwi'n meddwl fysa hwnnw yn rhywbeth o emergency brec i'r argyfwng sy'n gyda ni. Mae pobl ar y funud yn prynu tŷ yng nghefn gwlad o ganolfanna poblog, a fi ddeud yn blaen ddim ella o ochr arall i'r ffin, oherwydd y bwlch sy'n rhwng prisio. Welis i erthigol yn y Manchester Evening News yn dweud rhywbeth fel a gorgeous seaside mansion on the Menai Strait, cheaper than a flat in Greater Manchester. Mae hwnna rwsyd yn crisialu gwraidd y broblam fod prisio rwsyd yng Nghymru yn rhatach na mewn llefydd lawar fwy poblog. Ac felly mae prynu tai yng Ngwynedd gyn y bobl yma yn fuddsoddiad, petai ni'n codi treth tir ar ail gartra yn sylweddol uwch, mi fysa hynny'n ffactor fysa nid o'n llai o fuddsoddiad. Be da ni'n weld yn Nefyn, nid yn unig tai efo golygfa'r môr sy'n mynd yn ail gartrefi, ond mae yna dai teras ganol pentra, stryd fawr, yn mynd hefyd, tai sy'ch chi'n disgwyl a sydd wedi bod yn wylo teuluodd ers blynyddoedd. Wedyn, os fysa na dreth tir sylweddol ar y tŷ yna, wrth iddo fo gael ei brynu fel gartra, fysa na ddim gymaint o brynianna wedyn. Ella yr dilema fysa gyn yr awdurdod lleol wedyn ydy broblem gyllidol. Os dyn nhw'n prynu, os oes y lai o ailgartrefi'n cael ei prynu, yna lai o refniw treth tir. Ond yn adol i, dim mwy am byd â chi'n codi'r dreth tir yna. Gwch chi yr un incwm am lai o dai sy'n cael ei prynu. Mae hwnna'n un beth dwi wedi bod yn bwysleisio. Mae angen i godi fo'n sylweddol uwch, achos bod y bwlch rhwng prisio fan hyn ac ochr arall i'r ffin yn sylweddol. A mae angen i ni gyfarch hynny drwy godi'r dreth tir. Wedi adael hynny fynd ar y funud. O gynnau bwynt arall o'n eisiau gwneud efo Hugh, ond wedi mynd allan o'n meddwl i wan. Dwi ddim yn cofio'n union beth o di ofyn, a dwi'n ymddiheuro os dwi'n ateb i gwestiwn o'n iawn.
No, that's fantastic, Rhys. Diolch. I'm going to come to Sel Jones now, because Sel's had his hand up for ages. Sel, I'm sorry I missed you there.
Okay.
Pressure's on now.
Stori o Nefyn, blwyddyn yn ôl, yn yr ha, eithon ni cwt shed, neu beth bynnag, caffi bach ar y ffordd i fyny i lle golf. A holi ferch ifanc yna yn gweithio. Ac oedd hi'n gweithio tymor yr haf, a wedyn oedd hi mwy o lai allan o waith am gweddill y flwyddyn. A nes i ofyn iddi sut oedd hi'n teimlo, a mae'n deud, wel, be dwi'n weld, meddai hi, dwi'n gweithio fan hyn am gyflog minimum wage, a mae pobl fan hyn sydd yn dŵad ac yn prynu tai ac yn cynyddu prisio tai, a fyddai byth yn gallu cael mynediad i fewn i'r farchnad tai yna. Allai byth prynu tŷ yn yng nghymuned i, a dwi'n meddwl mae hwnna di'r pwynt sylfaenol, ydy hawl pobl i fyw o fewn i cymunedau yna. Ac yn hynny o beth, mae rhaid ymyrryd yn y farchnad yna. I mi, mae'r cysyniad o tŷ fforddiadwy yn bach o misnoma, achos os di un tŷ yn fforddiadwy, yn naturiol wedyn, mae gweddill y tai yn anfforddiadwy. Felly, be da ni'n mynd i greu wedyn? Ydyn ni'n mynd i greu rhyw fath o bantwstans ar gyrion yn pentrefi ni, lle mae calonna y cymunedau yna wedi cael eu cloddi allan yn dau ha i gyd. Na allwn ni ddim derbyn hynny, mae rhaid i ni wneud rhywbeth am hynny. Ac yn gyntaf, mae rhaid ni asesu be di anghenion cymunedau go iawn. Ac wedyn bod rwy'n yn pwyso mesur, wel, dyma be di anghenion yn ôl oedran, yn ôl twf, mwyn i ni allu cadw ysgol o fewn cymuned neu be bynnag. A wedyn bod ni wedyn, yn defnyddio'r asedion sydd gynnon ni, ac os di hynna'n golygu prynu fewn i'r stoc tai presennol, dwi'n meddwl bod yn bwysig bod ni'n neud hynny. Tydi hwnna ddim yn gysyniad newydd. Dwi'n gallu mynd yn ôl i'r 70au ac yn gweithio mewn cymdeithas tai, a dyna'r unig beth oedden ni'n neud oedd prynu tai o fewn cymunedau, prynu mwyn i gwella nhw, mwyn gosod nhw ar rent. Ar hyn o bryd, swn i'n dweud, nath rhywun wneud rhyw bwynt ynglyn a ni'n pawb sydd isio tŷ cymdeithasol. Y gwir ydy, mae hynna'n wir, ond y reality yn rhan fwy o'r cymunedau yma, yr unig beth mae pobl yn gallu fforddio ydy tŷ cymdeithasol. A tos yn byd o'i le ar cael tŷ cymdeithasol. Fi sy'n ymwneud efo deddf eiddo, ac y camgymeriad wnaethon ni ar y pryd oedd meddwl mai dim ond grym economaidd oedd yn prisio pobl allan o'r farchnad. Be mae rhywun wedi ddallt erbyn hyn ydy bod o lot mwy cymhleth na hynny. Ar y pryd, oedd angen stimulus i'r economi, angen i bobl benthyca, a pa ffordd gwell i bobl benthyca, ond ar y syniad bod gwerth i tŷ nhw yn cynyddu. Felly oedden nhw'n gallu cymryd morgeis arall, cymryd benthyciad allan, ac o hynna yn ei hun yn cyflyru rhyw fath o ffug economi ar sail ddim arian go iawn, ond cynnydd mewn gwerth tŷ. Peth arall, da ni ddim wedi sôn amdano fo, ydy y sector rentu preifat, a dwi'n meddwl bod yna broblemau dychrynllyd efo hwnna, lle mae yna alla fod yn prynwyr tro cyntaf, sydd yn cael eu prynu gan pobl da ni'n nabod, ac yn cael eu gosod ar rent. Ond rwan, mae o'n fwy proffidiol i'r pobl yna yn hytrach na i rhentu nhw, ond i osod nhw ar Airbnb, a mae hwnna yn bla da ni ddim wedi sôn amdano fo fan hyn. A dwi yn meddwl bod hwnna yn rhywbeth ddylen ni bwyso a mae posib i rheoleiddio hwnna. Yn sicr mae angen caniatâd cynllunio i droi eiddo o fod yn gartre i fod yn Airbnb ac hefyd i fod yn DH. Mae rhaid i ni weld ffyrdd sut da ni'n gallu ymyrryd yn y farchnad yma i ddod â tai yma yn ôl dan rheolaeth y gymuned ei hunain ar lefel lleol. Mae cymdeithas y tai bellach wedi mynd yn conglomerates anferthol. Mae Ceredigion a Mid Wales ar fin cyfuno ar sector bancio sydd yn gwthio hynny, achos maen nhw'n gwthio bod nhw eisiau unedau mwy fel bod eu buddsoddiad nhw mwyn iddyn nhw wneud return ar investment da ar draul pobl clota cymdeithas yn cyflyru. Mae rhaid ni newid hwnna i gyd, a dwi'n licio'r syniad o bod ni'n mynd yn ôl i ryw fath o syniad bod gynnon ni gymdeithasau tai ar lefel cymunedol sydd yn prynu ymyrryd yn y farchnad na, nhw sydd yn nabod eu cymunedau nhw a nhw sydd yn gallu ateb yr anghenion. Tydi adeiladu degau o filoedd o dau, dydy o ddim yn bolisi tai a tydy o ddim yn bolisi economaidd chwaith.
Diolch, Sel. A lot of profound points there. Do you want to come back to Sel? Ellen, did you have your hand up then? No. Okay, sorry. You did?
I'm just having trouble with my computer.
Okay.
Dwi'n cytuno 100% efo bob dim nath Sel ddweud rwan. A mae'n hollol wir, mae'n holl bwysig bod ni'n clywed yr negeseuon mae hyn yma, bod ni'n gallu gwneud rhywbeth amdano fo. Mae'n holl bwysig bod ni, mae yna 51 ohono ni yma hyn yma. Os ar 51 ohono ni yn codi'n lleisiau ac yn gwneud rhywbeth amdano hyn, mi fysa fo yn dipyn o beth. Mae rhaid i dau fod yn wylo yn cymunedau ni. Mae nhw'n unedau hollol greiddiol i'n cymunedau ni, felly mae o'n hurt bod rheolaeth drostyn nhw a'r gallu i roi cartref i bobl yn syrthio tu allan i reolaeth yn cymunedau ni, a mae'n rhaid o fod ar y lefel mwyaf lleol bosib. Un peth swn i'n nodi amdano y syniad o godi treth tir ar ailgartrefi, dwi'n meddwl, ia, sicr yn y tymor byr, mae'n rhaid codi fo yn sylweddol, mae'n rhaid rhoi hawl i gynghora sir wneud hynny. Ond yn y tymor hir, dydy codi rhywbeth ar lefel ariannol ddim yn ddigon. Mae'n rhaid i'n rhoi o mewn dad bod cartref yn bwysig, bod cartref i'n cymunedau ni'n bwysig. Oherwydd be wneith ddigwydd ydy fydd codi y pris a allu cael ail gartref yma nid yn fwy deniadol, a fydd cyflogau uwch yn dod yma ac yn prynu nhw, ac bydd o'n cael ei adeiladu mewn i'r buddsoddiad ac mewn i'r return ac mewn i'r syniad o'r ail gartref yn y tymor hir. So, yndi, mae eisiau codi'r treth yn ofnadwy, ond yn yr hir dymor mae eisiau gwneud rhywbeth lot mwy sylfaenol na hynny i newid y ffordd da ni'n mynd efo hwnna chi da.
Diolch, Ellen. To go back to one of the things that Sel said, this is my personal opinion, but when Sel was talking about the girl in Nevin, for me, we have to focus this campaign. It's about social justice and class. It is at heart, it's quite basic. Some people have no access to housing, while some people have, multiple houses, and it's working class people. Whether you go to Nevin, whether you go to inner city Cardiff or Swansea or Bridgend or Ceredigion or whatever, some people are excluded from the housing market. It really is that simple. I'm going to take a question from Cara and Steve. Then I think what is important, we've got, over 50 people in this meeting tonight, which shows the depth of passion that exists around this topic, which is absolutely fantastic. As I said, I really hope everyone here checks out Indon, and please join, because we are about to start a campaign which we hope for the first time will try to unite the housing struggle in all of the parts of Wales and try to finally speak a common language that brings everyone together rather than working in silos, to use like corporate speak. So I hope you all join, because we're gonna we need a meeting when we basically have everyone together, and where we essentially have a massive we thrash it out, and we come up with a plan for campaign, and we delegate roles and everything like that. So Cara and Steve, do you want to pop a question, and then I'll start to wrap up, if that's okay?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I've really enjoyed this evening, and it's very heartening to see the speakers, just to see these organized voices coming together. I just wanted to further from what Robert touched on, that we we've got together, we've pulled sort of people who've been involved in various campaigning groups or just worked individually. We're sort of working together to create this charter, for a housing charter. What we're trying to do, the idea is that we put a housing charter together that will represent the kind of demands that we address, the issues that we've been hearing about tonight. And that we put it to, because it's the Senedd elections next year, and the idea is that we generate enough momentum behind the charter so that we can get candidates for the Senedd elections next year to oblige them to give a response to the charter, to take a position on it, to take a position on housing, because I think what I'm concerned about, I mean, in the first instance, what we're trying to do is generate county councils to debate declaring a housing emergency, which we would like to see happen across Wales. That's the first thing. But the next thing next year is to oblige Senedd candidates for the Senedd elections next year to take a position on housing, because I hear so many good ideas. I hear the problems, I hear the heartbreak in communities up and down Wales. I think we need to make our representative, our elected representatives, they need to be made to take a position on this, and we need to make them do it. And I think that the charter is one way we're trying to make that happen. And it's an open and democratic process. We invite anybody to contribute to it. And when the charter is agreed, then what we're hoping to do is to go to the Senedd in Cardiff and present it to the Senedd, to the top man. My gosh, I've just blown it. Come on, help me out. Who's that?
Mark Drakeford.
Mark Drakeford, oh my gosh.
Come on, the man with the allotment. You know.
Yes, the man with the allotment. Sorry. So we need to go to the Senedd, go directly to the powers that be and say, come on, what's your position on this? And I don't know how we fully do that, how we fully develop that idea, realise the potential of that. But you know, anyone's got any ideas towards that, then we would love to hear them.
Deal, Karen. So basically, this is exactly what we want to do now, and we want to come together very soon and put our heads together and think of how, you know, what are the ways in which we can put pressure on our elected representatives. As Neil has just pointed out, you know, so many of the Senedd, so many of the elected members in the Senedd are landlords. So many of them have second homes. You know, the Minister for the Welsh Language has a second home in St. David's. This is something that we're going to have to, you know, really drag this issue kicking and screaming to make people to sit up and take note, because it's something that, you know, and it is about class. You know, the people who are writing this legislation, who are patting themselves on the back at how progressive they are, they live in massive, you know, 500,000 houses in Pontcanna, the majority of our assembly members and, you know, policymakers. They're completely removed from the reality and from the ramifications of their own policy. You know, I used to work in Cardiff University, and I, you know, one of my colleagues wrote a bit of policy, which, and the end of that policy was the Welsh Government removing priority need for prison leavers, which has literally ruined the lives of thousands and thousands of young people leaving prison. And that was praised at the time. Oh, fantastic impact. Well done, you've had an impact and you've influenced Welsh Government policy. And it basically, it's ruined people's lives, because they, you know, these people are the people who rule our country live very cosseted, very comfortable lives. And so then, you know, we need to sort of drag this and sort of rub their faces in it, basically. So to wrap up now, I wanted to go around each of our wonderful guests tonight and just ask them, you know, put pressure on them, sorry, but in an ideal world, or rather, you know, what is the most pressing thing that faces Wales? And if you could do one thing, you know, to sort of one concrete policy demand to try to solve the housing crisis, what would it be? So I'm going to go in the same order as before. So Jenny, what would be the one thing that you would want to
one thing? I think I would adopt an explicit policy that we don't want to see any more house price growth, that we need house prices to stay flat, zero house price inflation, so that people's incomes can catch up. And to do that, you would need to do a lot of the interventions that we've talked about this evening. You'd need to bring in some tax interventions. You'd need to regulate and cap numbers of second homes and holiday homes in certain places. And you'd need to shore up people's rights as well. So the right to adequate housing would be a vital part of that.
Diolch, Jenny. I want to say as well, Shelter Cymru are a fantastic group, particularly because, unlike a lot of third sector bodies, they don't seem to be beholden to the Welsh Government. And, Jenny in particular has done some fantastic work in speaking out. It's incredibly refreshing. It's not normal, within the third sector and charities in Wales. People know what the problems are, but they won't say anything because they're scared of losing their funding. So Shelter do fantastic work. They have outreach workers that, are just really, really brilliant. And like Jenny's put in the chat, if you can, sign Shelter Cymru's Build Social Housing campaign. So that's one thing you can tangibly do from this talk, is if you will go in the chat and, sign Shelter Cymru's campaign, that would be brilliant. So Rhys, what would be the one policy that you would institute, mate?
Wel, mewn sefyllfa ddelfrydol, swn i'n licio gweld bod gyda ni yng Nghymru sefyllfa debyg i syna mewn llefydd ag Guernsey, lle mae yna flaenoriaeth i bobl leol yn llwyr, a mond nifer cymunedig o dau sy'n mynd i bobl sydd ddim yn lleol. Swn i'n licio gweld hynny, ond dwi'n cydnabod, swn i'n gofys ag unrhyw lywodraeth ewellu sy'n gwneud hynny'n anffodus, sydd yn drist. Ond wbeth swn i'n licio weld yn digwydd rwan, a mi allith o gael i reid mewn grym rwan, ydy newid yng nghyfradd y dreth tir higher rates ar ailgartrefi. Mi newidwyd y cyfraddau yn sgil argyfwng coronavirus, a hynny mwy na heb dros nos. Mae isio felly newid y cyfraddau i gyfarch yr argyfwng sgynna ni hefo ailgartrefi. Mae isio codi'r dreth tir na yn sylweddol uwch. Broblem sgynna ni ydy, mae isio deddfa newydd wrth gwrs, deddf eiddo, mae isio hynny cyn gyntaf y bor modd. Broblem ydy fod o'n broses hirfaeth sydd i galon. Hefyd, fysa defnyddio pwerau godi treth cyngor, so ni'n penderfynu fore nesaf i godi treth cyngor, so hynny ddim o'n grym dan 2 flynedd. Ond mi fedrwn ni godi treth tir rwan hyn, a hwnna di'r emergency brake sydd i angen ar gyfer yn cymunedau ni sydd mewn argyfwng. Mae eisiau pwysleisio ar hynny, lle bod ni'n golli ffocws, mynd ar ôl deddf ac yn colli cyfeiriad am bod peth yn cymryd cyhyd. A da ni wedi bod yn gwynebu'r argyfwng yma ys degawda, a does am llawer o symud o gwbl wedi cael ei wneud. Dyna pam mae rhaid ni mynd ar ôl pethau pragmataidd fydd yn gwneud gwahaniaeth fore nesaf. A treth tir, dwi'n meddwl, ydy'r atab i hynny.
Diolch, Rhys. Fantastic idea there. Elin?
So gan bod ni'n siarad amdan sefyllfa hollol ddelfrydol yn fyma, mi fyswn ni'n dweud na'r un peth ydyn ni angen edrych i gael yn yr tymor hir ydy bod tai yn cael ei dynodi yn gartrefi cyntaf cyn bod modd iddyn nhw fod yn unrhyw beth arall. Felly bod nôl deddf gwlad bod dim posib i gartra gael ei newid yn digwyliau, yn unrhyw beth arall yn siop, yn Airbnb, heb wneud yn siŵr yn gyntaf fod bob un aelod o'r gymuned hefo cartref. A mae hynna'n holl bwysig, so cartrefi cyntaf. Ond hefyd, dwi'n meddwl, os ga i jyst deud yma, un o'r pethau mae Dan wedi deud hyn lot o weithiau ydy, tra ydyn ni gyd yn fyma yn cymunedau ni yn stryglo basically i gael cartref i allu cynnal yn cymunedau ni. Dydyn ni ddim yn gallu meddwl amdan ddim byd arall, a mae yn anodd codi'n pennau uwch ben y parad. A mae hynny'n un o'r pethau sydd yn cael ei ddefnyddio i'n cadw ni lawr mewn ffordd os da ni am edrych arno fo fel yna. A mae yn holl bwysig bod ni yn wan, fatha mae'r Rhys yn dweud, mae hyn wedi bod yn mynd ymlaen am ddegawda. Da ni angen rhoi emergency brake arno fo efo'r petres, ond hefyd mae rhaid i ni edrych i'r dyfodol, coelio fedra ni gael dyfodol sydd yn hollol wahanol i hyn, ac mae rhaid i ni ail diffinio sut ydym ni'n edrych ar gartra a tynnu fo allan o'r syniad yma o fod yn asset.
Absolutely. Right, so there's a couple of things we've had, as I said, a very good turnout tonight. It is it's a Wednesday. So I want to thank you all for coming. There are concrete things we can do. First, if you sign Shelter Cymru's charter that Jenny builds social houses that Jenny has put in the chat. Second, Cymdeithas have rallies this weekend.
I meant to say that. So we have rallies in 3 different locations this weekend. The one local to us here is in Llanberis at 11 o'clock. And all the details of all the rallies are on all our social media and everything. Rhys is talking in the one in Llanberis, so you'll be able to hear him talk again. So sa'n wych sa chi gyd yn dod. Fedra ni'n cario ymlaen fel yma. Mae rhaid i ni roi stop ar hyn wan, a mae rhaid i ni ymateb i anghenion cymunedau ni.
So absolutely everyone who is here, we were ordered to go to these demos. Certainly all Undod members, we have to go to these to show our support and solidarity with Cymdeithas. And finally, I would urge you all to join Undod. We've written, I think, a pretty fantastic housing campaign, a policy document, which I'm putting in the chat as well. So please join us as we try to, deal with these issues collectively. Because we're going to start charging soon, so join, otherwise it's going to be, you have to start paying. Yeah, so I just want to say thank you so much for coming. If you can have a big round of applause, you can unmute, and for our fantastic guest speakers. Well done. Josh, Jenny, Ellen. Thank you very much, Owain and Harry, for organising it and streaming it on Facebook. As I said, going to these events, it is super important, because obviously, WhatsApp and stuff, you start to lose your head. It's very important to have these events. And I'm sure we'll all agree that the more we do these, the more motivated we'll become to actually solve this problem. And 50 motivated people is a fantastic start, and 50 motivated people can really achieve a lot. So if you watch this space, very soon we'll be sending out details of our campaign meeting that we invite you all to come. You'd have to be a member of Undod, but please come to the meeting, and then we'll start brainstorming, coming up with ideas, delegating roles and tasks, and we hope to see you there. Okay, so thanks so much again for coming, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye.
Enjoy the second half.
Diolch yn fawr, start.